If you ache for truth, goodness, and beauty, if you're hungry for a Christianity with substance and strength, if you long for a faith that's big and bold and biblical and all about Jesus Christ, if you're inspired by the idea of one church that has spanned 20 centuries, 24 time zones, and 2 hemispheres, enfolding every race, nation, and language, then you're considering Catholicism. Welcome back to this series I've been doing, kind of on and off. I've had some breaks in it, called Mary in the Dock. And as I've explained in the intro to the other episodes in the series, the dock is a term from British courtrooms, and it's where the defendant, the person on trial, sits or stands while the trial is going on. So to be in the dock means to be on trial. And as I've said, far be it from me or any of us to put the Blessed Virgin Mary, Our Lady, the Mother of God, on trial. But in this series, what I am sort of putting on trial are the Marian doctrines in Catholicism. So I know so many of my listeners out there are, curious about Catholicism, Protestants, working through it. A lot of times, Marian doctrine is one of the biggest hurdles that people have to get over. And so in this series, I thought, well, what I'll do is put those Marian doctrines on trial. So that's why I'm calling this Mary in the Dock. And the format that I'm using is for each of these doctrines, I give the prosecution case, which is the strongest version of the Protestant arguments. And of course, having been a Protestant myself for so many years, these are the things that I would have said or did say back then about the Marian doctrines. So I don't want to give a straw man version. I want to give a steel man version. I give the steel man version of the Protestant arguments, and then I give the Catholic defense, and then I let you decide. So what we're going to take on today is the perpetual virginity of Mary. Now, the picture that most Protestants, especially American evangelical, non-denominational types, have in their minds is that the Holy Family includes Mary and Joseph, Jesus, and then other brothers and sisters. So that after Jesus was born, Mary and Joseph went on and had a normal marriage. They had marital relations and other children. Because that feels natural and right. Mary was a good wife. She would have gone on and been a good wife to Joseph, and they would have done the things that husbands and wives do. Doesn't the Bible say that husbands and wives are to be fruitful and multiply together? So this kind of feels good. It feels like how, good Christian marriage and family life should go. Why wouldn't Mary and Joseph have had other children? Why would Mary not have had marital relations with Joseph? But what if that picture, for all of its warmth and familiarity and sort of common sense, attractiveness, is actually not the understanding that the early Christians had of Mary and Joseph and their relationship? What if the church, Christians in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the first decades of the church, from the very beginning, saw Mary's life as marked by a total lifelong virginity that continued even after she became the mother of her Lord? And that claim is what we're going to put on trial today. So I'm going to call court to session. Let me bang my gavel here. I don't know if you can hear it. It's supposedly that's my gavel, my fist on my desk. But here we go. The charge is that the perpetual virginity of Mary is not taught in Scripture and was introduced later under the influence of ascetic ideas and movements that had a very low view of marriage and the body. So later on, after Augustine and into medieval Catholicism, the idea of marriage and sexuality was downgraded, not considered important. And then the medieval Catholic Church sort of retroactively imposed those ideas on Mary, inventing the notion that she was a perpetual virgin. So here's the prosecution's case. It rests on three main lines of evidence. The first is the language of the New Testament. Now, the Gospels and Acts refer to Jesus' brothers and sisters in ways that appear pretty straightforward. So, for example, in Mark chapter 6, verse 3, the people of Nazareth, the town that Jesus grew up in, ask, "Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" In Matthew 13:55, you have nearly the identical list. In John chapter 7, verses 3 through 5, we see his brothers urging him to go up to the feast in Jerusalem, and the narrator notes that even his own brothers did not believe in him. Acts, the book of Acts, chapter 1, verse 14, places Mary with the apostles and, quote, with his brothers after the ascension. So, on a natural reading, these are his siblings, his brothers and his sisters, born to Mary and Joseph after the birth of Jesus. That's the prosecution's first point. The prosecution's second point is this. Matthew chapter 1, verse 25, part of the nativity narrative, okay, story of Jesus' birth. And that verse says that Joseph, quote, knew her, meaning Mary, knew her not until she had borne a son. Joseph, quote, knew her not until she had borne a son. Now, in ordinary English, and in some biblical contexts, the word until signals the situation that held true up to a certain point and then changed. So, we stayed at the park having our picnic until it rained. Okay? After it started raining, we no longer were at the park having our picnic, right? That's the sense of the word until in English. So when we read that verse, Matthew 1:25, that Joseph did not have marital relations with Mary up to the birth of Jesus, until the birth of Jesus, the implication for most of the most modern readers is that after the birth of Jesus, he did know his wife in, that sense. That seems like the plain sense of the text. Okay? That's the prosecution's second point. The prosecution's third point is historical. There is no explicit defense or even clear statement of Mary's perpetual virginity in the New Testament itself. The first person we know of who openly denied it was a Roman layman named Helvidius, writing around the year 383. Before that, the idea was not a major point of controversy. When it was challenged, it was defended by figures like Jerome, but the defense itself arose in the context of a growing ascetic movement in the church that placed a high value on virginity and sometimes viewed marriage as a lesser vocation. So, what all that means is, on this reading, the perpetual virginity of Mary is a 4th century development shaped by later ideals under people like Jerome and later on Augustine that had a very low view of sexuality and marriage. And they, again, retroactively sort of read that back into the life of Mary. Okay, those are the prosecution's 3 points. And I think they're serious, and I think they are the strongest points. Again, I'm not giving straw man versions here. They are rooted in the text of Scripture and in the historical record, and they deserve to be examined carefully and answered honestly. So I am now going to proceed to give the Catholic defense. So the defense rises and begins with a closer look at the actual language of the New Testament. So let's begin with this whole business about Jesus's brothers, that he had brothers, and we see that mentioned in several verses, as I just quoted. The Greek word translated that we translate into the English word brother is adelphos, adelphoi. So in Greek, the os, adelphos, means brother, and oi at the end is the plural. So adelphos, brother, adelphoi, brothers. Now, in the Greek of the New Testament and in the Septuagint, okay, so the Septuagint, I've talked a lot about that on this show. The Septuagint was the Greek translation of the Old Testament that the apostles used, that everybody was using at the time of Jesus. It was the accepted version of the Old Testament in Greek, generated by Jewish scholars. So their understanding of Greek, which shaped their decision to write the New Testament in Greek, is rooted in the Septuagint's grammar and idioms and vocabulary. So in the Greek of the New Testament and in the Greek of the Old Testament through the Septuagint, adelphos does not always mean a brother born of the same two parents. It does not always mean a sibling. It frequently refers to what we would call a kinsman, a cousin, or a close relative in your extended family. So let me give you clear biblical examples. Genesis chapter 13, verse 8. Abraham says to his nephew Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, for we are brothers." Again, Lot was Abraham's nephew, the son of his deceased brother Haran. And yet Abraham calls him adelphos, brother, family member, kinsman. The same broader usage of brother appears elsewhere in the Old Testament, and it gets carried into the New Testament world. And we do the same thing today. People call close friends or extended family my brothers and sisters without fully meaning biological siblings. So when the neighbors asked if they didn't know his brothers and sisters, they meant his kinfolk, the people that he grew up with, his cousins, his nephews, his uncles, all of the people in his extended family. That's how that word adelphos or adelphoi had that broader meaning. Look, here's a great example today, right? So as I've said, adelphoi is the plural version, right? Brothers. And philos is one of the Greek words for love. So philos and adelphoi is brotherly love. And we have a city named after that, Philadelphia. Literally, the city Philadelphia is named the city of brotherly love. That's literally what it means. And yet no one thinks that every resident in Philadelphia is a literal sibling just because they're part of the city of brotherly love, right? And when we look at the Gospels themselves, we find some pretty important clues. So at the foot of the cross, John chapter 19, verse 25, lists the women who were standing there. It says his mother, Jesus' mother, Mary, and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. So there were three Marys standing at the foot of the cross. Mary, Jesus' mother, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Mark chapter 15:40 identifies one of the women at the cross and at the tomb as Mary, the mother of James the younger and of Joseph. Now, this Mary, the mother of the very brothers named in Mark 6. So remember back in Mark 6, it said, hey, are not his brothers here, James and Joseph? And we read in the resurrection narrative that there was a Mary that came to the tomb who was Mary, the mother of James the younger and Joseph, right? And this Mary, the mother of the very brothers that are named there, is explicitly distinguished from Mary, the mother of Jesus. So I mean, I know this is getting really confusing. You're probably driving in your car, walking your dog or something. But you can find in about 2 seconds online, like charts, like family tree type charts that sort of show all the Marys and the people in the New Testament. And this is Mary, the wife of Clopas. Mary, the wife of Clopas, who had sons named James and Joseph. And that's different than Mary, the wife of Joseph, the mother of Jesus. So they were kinsmen, part of the same extended family, but they weren't siblings. And if we go back in the early Christian tradition, back to the 2nd century writer Hegesippus, whose work is preserved by Eusebius, identifies Clopas as the brother of Joseph. So this would make James, Joseph, and the others the cousins of Jesus according to the flesh. Okay? I know this is getting confusing because this is like going to a big extended family picnic. Like you marry into some family, or you go with your friend from college to his big family, extended family, reunion. And you're getting introduced to, Bob and Dave and Mary and Joan and he's my second cousin by first marriage. And no, she's married us. And it gets super confusing. I understand. But, families were families back then as they are now. And we can unravel some of this in the New Testament and from the early Christian writings. And in Jewish usage, the way the Jews used the words, their vocabulary, and the way that the ancient Greek world understood it, that word adelphos or adelphoi all could refer to people in your extended family. They're all kinfolk. And the church, the early Christian church, whether it's the Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, always understood the brothers of the Lord mentioned in the New Testament as close kinsmen of Jesus, not as younger siblings born to Mary after Jesus. It's the way the texts were read by Christians who were much closer to the original language, culture, and family and connections we are. I spent, I think I got 6 years of studying Greek, 2 years in college and 4 years in seminary. And look, I wouldn't even pretend to understand Greek the way that a native speaker in the first century did, because I took some classes in college, some classes in grad school. When you have native speakers, and remember, all of these early church fathers were native speakers of Greek as it was used in the Eastern Mediterranean in the first centuries. They understood the metaphors, the idioms, the vocabulary, and they read these things and it made sense to them. We come along thousands of years later and say, hey, I had 2 years at Bible college and I can tell you what the plain meaning of these words are. And the people who grew up in that culture speaking that language natively, they didn't understand the grammar of their own sentences. I literally could not do this without you, because this show is 100% listener supported. There are no ads, no sponsors. So if the episodes are helping you to understand the faith, to answer your questions, or draw you closer to historic Catholic Christianity, would you consider becoming a patron? For as little as $5 a month, you'll get every regular episode organized into topical playlists, plus exclusive bonus content, extra conversations, video Q&As, deep dives, live streams, behind the scenes, and more. Just head to patreon.com/considering Catholicism or tap the link in the show notes. Together, we're educating, equipping, and exciting people about the beauty of the Catholic faith. And that brings me to the second Protestant charge, this whole business about the word until in Matthew 1:25. So remember, in Matthew chapter 1, verse 25, it says that Joseph knew not Mary until she had Jesus. And the Protestant charge is like, he didn't know her until she had Jesus. And the until implies that after she had Jesus, he did know her in the, biblical sense of, as a wife, right? Having sexual relations with her. So Look, in Scripture, the word until often describes a situation up to a certain point without implying anything about what happens after that point. Let me just give you some examples. If we go back to 2 Samuel 6:23 in the Old Testament, okay? It's about the story of Saul. And here's what it says. And Michal, that's Michal, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child until the day of her death. Now, no reading of this verse concludes that Michal had children after her death. So to say that she had no child until the day of her death does not imply that after the day of her death she had children. The until simply marks the boundary of the time that you're considering. It doesn't say anything about what happens afterwards. Let me give you some further examples. In Genesis chapter 8, verse 7, Noah sends out the raven. You know, the ark has settled on the top of the mountain and the waters are subsiding, and he's trying to decide when it's safe to go outside. And it says that the raven went forth and did not return until the water had dried up from the earth. Now, actually, as a matter of fact, the raven did not come back, even after the waters dried up. The raven just flew away and never came back. In Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 6, the burial of Moses, it says that the Lord buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, but no man knows his burial place until this day. Okay, that doesn't mean that the day after Deuteronomy was written, Moses' grave was suddenly discovered. In Matthew 28:20, the risen Jesus in the Great Commission says to the disciples, "Behold, I am with you always until the end of the age." That doesn't mean that after the end of the age, he will no longer be with us. Okay? Okay, and I could go on. And by the way, if for someone out there who says, well, those are Hebrew examples and Matthew was written in Greek, remember, all of these are that same use of the Greek word for that we translate until in the Septuagint. So the word is being used consistently. And look, we do this in English all the time. Okay, the phrase unconscious until death. So we'll say, after the accident, he remained unconscious until death. That doesn't mean that after death, he became conscious. It doesn't mean that his consciousness, the unconscious state, stopped after he died. It's just he remained unconscious until that point. Until is sort of the end of the time under consideration. When you receive an encrypted email, it will say encrypted until delivery. Okay? That doesn't mean that as soon as the message hits your inbox, until it's been delivered, it stops being encrypted. It's until you open it, right? Here's one. A parent will say, I will love you until my last breath. I will stand by you and love you until the day I die. That doesn't mean that after the day I die, I will stop loving you. So, you got to be careful about how you translate this word until. The bottom line is Matthew 1:25 is telling us that Joseph did not have marital relations with Mary up to and including the time of Jesus' birth. The evangelist is protecting the truth of the virginal conception. That's the point he's trying to make. He did not have marital relations with her all the way until Jesus was born. He's not making a statement about what happened afterwards. And to read a necessary change into the until grammar or the idiom is to bring a sort of modern linguistic assumption to an ancient text that doesn't require it. So again, just because you had 2 years of Greek in Bible college doesn't mean that you understand the Greek idiom better than the Christians who grew up with it as native speakers. And when we turn from the biblical text to the testimony of the early church, which is the third part of the prosecution's case, the evidence for perpetual virginity actually becomes more compelling because the belief that Mary remained a virgin after the birth of Jesus is not a 4th century invention. It's actually attested to from the 2nd century onward. So there is a book. It is not a part of the biblical canon, so it does not have canonical status, infallibility, but it was widely respected among the early church as a non-biblical, non-canonical, non-infallible, but widely read and understood, book in the ancient church that conveyed a lot of the early traditions of the church. It's called the Proto-Evangelium of James. It's written around the middle of the 2nd century, so the year 140, 150. And it already presents Mary as a virgin who had been dedicated to God from childhood. So in this compendium of the early traditions of the church, Mary was actually raised in the temple or in the temple courts as a sort of like kind of like a young nun. They didn't have nuns, but in the same way that a young woman would be dedicated to become a nun, there were temple virgins. Her parents, Joachim and Anna, had dedicated her to serve in the temple as a consecrated virgin. And that this is the woman that the angel came to, the young woman. And she kept her vows of serving in the temple and serving the Lord and serving the presence of the Lord by becoming the mother of the Lord. And again, this is not part of the New Testament canon. It is not infallible, but it does demonstrate that this understanding of Mary was already widespread within living memory of the apostolic age. So if things are around 130, 140 AD, those are people who had grown up instructed by the apostles. And if you go forward to writers such as Ignatius of Antioch in the early 2nd century, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus of Lyon, Clement of Alexandria, Origen, all of those early church fathers, within 100 years or so of the ascension and the life of the apostles, were speaking of Mary's virginity in ways that either assume or affirm it. By the middle of the 3rd century, Origen could refer to Mary as ever virgin without any sense that he was saying something that was controversial or new. That was just understood. By the 4th century, the doctrine is the common and undisputed teaching of the church throughout the Christian world. So Athanasius, the great defender of the divinity of Christ at Nicaea, assumes the perpetual virginity of Mary without any controversy. Ephraim the Syrian celebrates it in his hymns. Ambrose, Jerome, Augustine all defend it explicitly when it's challenged. When Helvidius challenged the doctrine of the perpetual virginity of Mary around the year 383, he was proposing a novel reading of Scripture that the overwhelming consensus of the church rejected. St. Jerome writes this famous treatise against Helvidius. And what Jerome writes isn't an innovation, but it's a defense of what the church had already believed for hundreds of years, centuries at that point. So the response of Jerome and others is not an invention of a new doctrine, but it's a clear articulation of the faith that had simply been handed down from the beginning. Now, the doctrine was not defined by an ecumenical council in the same formal way as some other truths of the faith because it was not seriously contested until that late date. And I have talked about this on the show a lot. A lot of the things that arose in the ecumenical councils, Council of Nicaea and this kind of stuff, were because a doctrine of the church was being challenged. And so seriously challenged, like Arianism was challenging the divinity of Christ, the full divinity of Christ. And so the council gathers to articulate and put that heresy down. The perpetual virginity of Mary, nobody ever really challenged it, so there was no reason to have a council. And when it was contested, the mind of the church was clear and it was united. This is what we've always believed about the Mother of the Lord. Okay, so I know this is just a lot and it can be confusing, everything I'm laying out here, but let me try to make some sense of it. Like, what's the logic of the whole thing? Because the defense of this doctrine isn't just merely a matter of answering Protestant objections from Scripture about grammar and vocabulary. It's a matter of recognizing the deep theological logic, the fittingness of Mary's perpetual virginity within the whole mystery of Christ. So think about it this way. As we've talked about in this series and innumerable times on this show over the years, Mary is the new Ark of the Covenant. Okay, in the Old Testament, the The ark was the most sacred object in Israel because it carried within it the presence of the Lord. So it had the stone tablets of the law, the jar of manna, Aaron's rod, staff. In the prophet Ezekiel's vision of the restored temple, he sees the glory of the Lord entering through the east gate, and then he's told, "This gate shall remain shut. It shall not be opened, and no one shall enter by it. For the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered by it. Therefore it shall remain shut." That's Ezekiel 44:2. Now, the early church saw this as a prophetic image of Mary. She is the gate through which the Lord entered the world in the incarnation. And because the Lord has entered by her, she remains closed, a sign of her perpetual virginity. This isn't an arbitrary restriction. It's a recognition of the unique and unrepeatable character of what happened in her. And this understanding, I think it fits perfectly with everything else that we've seen in this series about Mary. As the new Eve, she stands in total enmity with the serpent from the beginning. As the immaculately conceived one, she is preserved from original sin by a singular grace in view of the merits of her Son. As the mother of God, her womb became the first dwelling place of the eternal Word. As the new ark, she carried within her the presence of the Lord in a way that no other human being ever has or ever will. And in each of these roles, her entire being, body and soul, is set apart for the service of the mystery. So her perpetual virginity is the bodily expression of that total consecration to God. It is not a denial of her motherhood, but its highest fulfillment. The same body that bore the sinless Son of God remains wholly given to the sinless Son of God, a living sign that the incarnation was not one event among many, but it was the unique and unrepeatable center of human history. In the new covenant, marriage is honored as a sacrament. It's a living sign of Christ's faithful love for the church. But there's also the vocation to consecrated virginity, which is a sign of the resurrection life in which people neither marry nor are given in marriage, Matthew 22:30. We've talked about this before when we talk about the seven sacraments, that there are two sacraments of vocation, the sacrament of matrimony and the sacrament of holy orders. And while Mary isn't given to holy orders in the same sense that she's a diocesan priest, she's given the vocation of perpetual celibacy and virginity. It is her calling. It's the supreme realization of that sign in the person who is closest to Christ. It doesn't denigrate marriage of the body. It shows that the human person is capable, if called to it, of a total exclusive gift of self to God that transcends even the beautiful and holy gift of marriage. It's a sign that the body itself can be completely sanctified and offered to the service of the kingdom, and that such a gift is not a loss, but a fulfillment of what it means to be human. And this is why the church has always seen the perpetual virginity of Mary as a doctrine that glorifies both her and the mystery of the incarnation, right? I mean, it's not a negative statement about sex or marriage. It's a positive statement about the radical possibilities of grace in a human life. Because in Mary, God did something that was so unique, so utterly set apart, that her entire existence, including the integrity of her body, became a sign of that uniqueness. So her yes at the Annunciation wasn't a one-time decision that was later on, kind of modified or qualified. Her yes at the Annunciation, her total gift of self to the purpose of God, was a total, irrevocable, lifelong gift of herself that included every dimension of her being. The Protestant objections from Scripture, when you examine them in their original sort of linguistic, cultural, historical context, and when you read them in light of the Church's unbroken tradition, they don't require us to abandon this understanding. The broader meaning of brother in Adelphoi or Adelphos in biblical usage, the idiomatic character of the word until in Greek, the uniform testimony of the fathers from the 2nd century onward, and the profound theological logic of the doctrine all kind of come to the same conclusion. The perpetual virginity of Mary is not a later distortion imposed on the faith. It's the church's spirit-guided recognition of the full meaning of what God accomplished in and through this woman. It belongs together with her immaculate conception, her role as the new Eve, her identity as the mother of God. It is a doctrine that honors the goodness of the body, honors marriage by showing there is something even greater to which a person can be called, and above all, it honors Christ by manifesting the unique and unrepeatable character of the incarnation. And now, the defense rests. And you are the jury. The question that you must consider as the jury is whether you as the jury are willing to read the New Testament through the lens of the church that received it from the apostles, that lived it, that defended it against challenges, and it handed it on faithfully down through the centuries. Because the perpetual virginity of Mary is not a burden placed on the text from the outside. It's the natural and beautiful flowering of everything the church has always believed about the woman chosen to be the mother of the Lord. So, now you've heard the arguments for and against, and it's your turn to decide. Next time, we'll bring this series to a conclusion by looking at the doctrine of the Assumption. We'll bring that into the dock. But until then, keep considering Catholicism. We'll be back with another episode very soon. And this show is 100% listener supported. My patrons keep the lights on, and they let me spend more time researching and recording so that these episodes keep coming. If this show has helped you, would you consider becoming a patron? For as little as $5 a month, you'll get every regular episode organized into topical playlists, plus exclusive bonus content, extra video Q&As, deep dive courses, live streams, and more. Just head to patreon.com/considering Catholicism or tap the link in the show notes. And would you please rate the podcast on whatever platform you're using and write a review on Apple Podcasts or on consideringcatholicism.com. And you can drop me a line. Patrons can comment directly on Patreon posts or Spotify. I read every one. Or you can always use the contact form at consideringcatholicism.com, or you can email me at consideringcatholicism@gmail.com. I love hearing your questions, your comments, and your stories.